We create the world with what we know. And unfortunately for Teresa Lewis, she didn't know much. She was a girl that came from a small town where all there was to do was go to church. That's even where she met her first husband. That guy's name was Billy Bean. Yeah, we're in Danville, Virginia. But to most people, Teresa had it all. Marriage, family, a comfortable life. But being a kept woman in a poor town doesn't have many bells and whistles. She wanted more. She wanted excitement. And she found that in a 21-year-old guy that she met in a Walmart while waiting in line. This life-changing meeting quickly goes from drugs and sexcapades in parking lots with her daughter to one of the most horrific murders I've ever seen. And Teresa, not to spoil it, but they executed her. Teresa Michelle Wilson was born April 25th in 1969 in Danville, Virginia. Yes, she is originally from there. This is one of those small towns where when you're born there, you don't always leave. I mean, don't get me wrong. Some people get out, but you know exactly what I mean. There's not much inspiration going on. There's not many people that get out. So a lot of the residents don't really think that it's possible for them. Now, Danville isn't just your typical suburb. It's got more of an industrial feel. Most of the residents either worked in the textile factories or the tobacco farms. So this means that people had jobs for their entire lives. Like, why leave? And also, it means there were a lot of transplants as well. People would travel up to work at Dan River Textile Mill, which was one of the largest in the South. Back in the 1960s, this textile mill employed over 18,000 people in a city where the population was only about 50 or 60,000. I mean, this place took over the whole town. Families worked here, couples met here. And also, this was a place where people were doing a lot of labor with their hands. It was very exhausting. So their lives were very much get up in the morning, talk to your family for 2 seconds, get off to the mill, do a lot of exhausting labor all day, and then just come home and be tired. Really, that's it. And that's what over 30% of the population in the city was doing. Now, people that worked a lot at the factories and were able to control their budget could honestly save quite a bit of money, especially if it was passed down from family member to family member. You could acquire a bit of wealth in Danville. But Teresa's family was not wealthy at all. They were poor and they worked at Dan River Textile Mill for very, very meager pay. Teresa's family were not the type of people that were coming in and giving this job their all, asking for raises, saving money. No, they did their jobs and then went home and got drunk or went for the high life, went for some adrenaline. I mean, their day-to-day was so boring. These are the type of people that were looking for excitement. They definitely were not saving for their future. But in towns like this, getting drunk after work or going out to bars and going dancing and, talking to people, that was normal. That's how people blew off a little bit of steam. Another thing that was pretty normal for Teresa and her family was they went to church every single Sunday. She was a church-going girl. And usually in the South, when you see somebody that is going to the church week over week, every Sunday, maybe they're doing a little Bible study on Wednesdays, you just kind of assume that they have some strong religious morals. But really, you'll find that going to church every Sunday did absolutely nothing for Teresa. Things are slow. Things are boring, but that's life in Danville. Until Teresa turns 16 and she meets a guy at church. I want to be very clear. There's a lot of stories that we'll go through where there's younger girls that end up dating some sleazy older guy that basically traps her into a relationship. But that wasn't exactly the case with Teresa. By all accounts, Teresa liked older men. She liked older men because she could go out and do the things that she wanted to do with them, like go to bars, go drinking, go out dancing. People said that when Teresa found an older guy that she liked, she would heavily pursue them. Now, this could all still be some type of trauma response, but I just want to paint an accurate picture of who Teresa was when she was 16 years old. She saw these older guys as kind of a status symbol of look at how mature I am. And also she saw them as a means to do things that she wanted to do, which were a little bit more adult. Now, this guy was Billy Bean. He was 20 years old and Teresa was 16 years old. Now, nowadays, we would be mean mugging this relationship. 16 and 20 years old, she's still in high school. But this was normal for people in the South, and they just said, oh, she found someone. I know the climate of the internet is a lot different now because a lot of us have dated these older guys and we look back on it like, what the fuck was I thinking? That guy was a creep. But people welcomed this in Teresa's life, so much so that she dropped out of high school and got married to him. So there's elements of Teresa liking these older guys and pursuing them, but then there's also elements of the town just kind of enabling this type of behavior. You know, drop everything in your life at 16 and marry this guy and become a dedicated wife. I think it's really, really important to take ourselves out of 2024 for a minute and sit in this time period so that you can understand how unprogressive Danville was. There was almost no way out. And for them, the schematic of being happy was getting married, going to church, and having a family. And that's what they did. Now, that's Teresa's family that says, yeah, you go, girl, go do that. Go drop out of school in the 11th grade and marry that church-going guy. Can you believe it? I wonder if this is still the sentiment in small towns or if like the internet completely broke this up. But it's just crazy to me reading this now. But the one person that didn't really endorse it was Billy Bean's mom. It was Teresa's new mother-in-law. She actually later went on to say that Teresa was, quote, not quite right. She called this out from the beginning, but, you know, it's Danville. We're not really causing many problems. We're just keeping to ourselves and going to the textile mill. But Teresa's new mother-in-law was kind of side-eyeing her. I mean, who knows what she saw? I do know that in the South and in Christian communities, we tend to minimize mental health. She may have had blaring signs of something being wrong, but in the South, we dwindle it down to, something's not right, but I'm not going to get into that. But she noticed Teresa was odd. Whatever her mother-in-law sees is unclear, but just a few years later, they divorced. Teresa begins to spiral because, remember, she was a 16-year-old girl that was whisked off into marriage. She didn't have any concept of life. She didn't have any goals or aspirations. She didn't know how to deal with any of her emotions. And now she's dealing with her first divorce at 18. Well, she does what everybody else in Danville does. She gets some alcohol, and then she also gets addicted to painkillers. People that come from a family that have a history of addiction are so prone to substance abuse when they encounter an emotion that is heavy and they don't know how to deal with. Grief is heavy. Abandonment is heavy. Feeling like you're not good enough is heavy. These are all things that could be circulating in an 18-year-old girl when she's going through her first divorce. So Teresa doesn't know how to deal with it. Everyone in Danville just modeled the behavior of keep your head down, keep working, have a drink about it. And that's the thing. When you do drugs, when you do painkillers, when you drink, it numbs out this emotion. And so anytime that feeling of I'm not good enough comes up, you can just drink it away. Anytime that you feel that abandonment, you can just numb it out. And this becomes the cycle. And from a very young age, she never, ever learned how to deal with any emotions. She just numbed them out. At this point, she's broke, addicted to drugs and alcohol, and divorced. So She goes to work at Dan River Textile Mill. Today's sponsor is Miracle, and I'm stoked on it because, look, y'all know I barely sleep at night, but when I do and I need a good sleep, I need good bedding, okay? Have you ever had like an amazing sleep at a hotel before? It's not the mattress, okay? It's not the hotel. It's the bedding. I'm telling you, this is one of the most important parts of getting a good sleep. And if you're somebody that runs hot or cold at night, Miracle bedding is especially made for you. They have temperature regulating bedding so you can sleep at the perfect temperature all night long. And it's soft, it's comfortable. Look, sheets are something that I think you should make the investment in. Why? Because you use it every single day and it's reusable. All you gotta do is throw your Miracle bedding into the washing machine and it's good to go. Personally, I'm still stuck on the comfort and quality, but Miracle sheets are also antibacterial, so you can minimize gross odors and you can protect your skin a little bit more. Just try them out. If you want to give it a shot, all you gotta do is go to trymiracle.com/sinister. Right now, you can save over 40%, and if you use our promo code Sinister, you get 3 free towels and save an extra 20%. What? You know I love a deal. Go to trymiracle.com/sinister. Now, I want to remind you guys, which I kind of try to do through every Sinister episode, that when I'm telling these stories, these people may seem very, very human in the beginning. But that's why a lot of us watch true crime. We want to know, oh my God, how did somebody get to the point of murder? And that's what I want to know too. I want to know this so I can look at the people around me or look at myself as well and figure out how this happened. I mean, it's a self-defense thing that we kind of have. We're looking at our surroundings wondering, are you going to kill me? Could I kill somebody? What led somebody to this point? Especially a woman that may have been through some things that you've been through, right? So my entire point of the show is to look for the human at the beginning, but the human that went wrong and did something that now has them cast out of society, which is murder. When you kill someone, you are no longer in the same societal group as the rest of us. And I want to know when that point happens. So I want to remind you that sure, I do try to find the human in these people in the beginning, but there's a reason for that. And there's always a point where they go off the beaten path. If you're ever listening to one of these stories and you feel like you've been through something similar that they have, don't forget, these people are killers. They let their perfectly normal problems that a lot of us have been through before consume them to the point of murdering another human being. You can listen to the story. You can understand how we got to this point. That's why we listen to true crime a lot of the time. But I want to remind you that these people are nothing like you and nothing like me in the very end. While Teresa was working at Dan River Mill, she ends up meeting a guy named Julian Lewis. Julian was also somebody that lived in Danville his whole life. He graduated from high school in Danville, went off to serve in the army, did his time, and came back and worked at the textile mill. I know, I said it wasn't a glamorous life, but Julian was a pretty normal guy. He was fine with this. He had gotten out of Danville, saw the world a little bit through the army, and decided, he wanted to come back home. He didn't mind Danville. He also had gotten married at 21 years old, and he had 3 children with his wife, Kathy, Jason, and Charles, who goes by CJ. After Julian quit the army, he just wanted to go home to his family. He wanted the stability. He wanted to wake up in the same place every day and do the same kind of things and just have the love of his wife and his family. And I was describing how Danville can be kind of dead end, kind of boring. But look, for some people, they like it. And I like the angle that Julian comes from. It comes from a place of my family gives me joy. My family gives me excitement. Teresa, she was a 16-year-old girl that didn't get along that well with her family, and she didn't have any kids, so she didn't have this same joy. She didn't care. Julian, he had seen the world, and he wanted to come back home. While Julian is working as an electrician at the mill, his wife, who had been quite sick for a while, was getting worse. He had moved back to have this big, happy family and be there and provide for his kids. He was a hardworking man. He was a very hardworking man. But his wife started to pass very slowly. And to watch a spouse slip away from sickness in such a slow fashion is devastating. And during this time, he was very vulnerable. As much as he tried to be strong for his wife day to day, when he would come home, he would break down. When he was at work, he would break down. And unfortunately, that is when Teresa Wilson slipped into his life. Now, once again, there's a huge age difference. Teresa's about 18 years younger than Julian when they meet. And Julian is sad, but it only gets worse on July 26th, 2000, when his wife actually does pass away. And right there nearby is Teresa. Now, earlier I was explaining to you guys that Teresa did like older men. I know, online we tend to project our own trauma of, being groomed by some old creepy guy. I've been there before too. But this is just not the case with Teresa. It just wasn't. Let me tell you what happened the next few months. When Julian was at his lowest, Teresa really dove in. I mean, it was some energy like, ooh, I can fix him. I can do this. And she laid it on thick. He barely even had time to grieve. In the months that followed after Julian's wife died, he wouldn't even eat. His kids would come over to the house. His daughter, Catherine, she would come over and try to get her dad to eat. I think that a lot of times it's hard for men to show emotions. They tend to try to just swallow it all and tank through the pain. But it was written all over Julian's face. And the kids were really concerned. They were coming over and trying to take care of dad every day. And he was just frozen. He could barely smile. He could barely talk. He would go an entire day without eating food. Kathy had to make the food for him and watch so that her dad would eat. He wasn't physically sick. He was sick with grief. He missed his wife. He missed his wife so much. He probably felt some regret that he had been gone in the army for so many years and didn't spend this time with her. And he's just constantly thinking about her slowly passing away in the hospital. The man was a wreck. And so Teresa comes in and she's young and she's flirty. And she's fun. She's at the mill having a cigarette with him, trying to make him laugh, something. And I'm going to make a little assumption here, but for women that grow up in a home with an emotionally unavailable parent or an emotionally unavailable dad, they try really hard to get attention from that parent. Let's just say it's a dad. If Julian was completely emotionally shut down from the loss of his wife, which everyone said that he was, and Teresa can come up and smile and be flirty and crack a few jokes and get a smile out of Julian, who's completely emotionally shut down, it does something for her ego. It's a massive dopamine hit for her to get something out of him that nobody else can get. And so she wants more. She wants so much more. Julian, let's go to the bar after work. You need a drink. Julian, let's go to the dance hall. You need this. You need to go have a fun night. So Teresa is laying it on thick because every single smile that she can get out of Julian is a little hit for her ego. And things move fast. Here's what's interesting. Julian was out spending a lot of time with Teresa. I think it was a big distraction for him. And it was fun because Teresa was giving it her all. But this was a secret relationship. He wasn't telling anybody in Danville about the relationship. Now, this could be for a couple of reasons. One, maybe he didn't want his 3 kids to know that he was moving on from his wife so quickly. It had only been a few months. I personally think that if Teresa wasn't laying it on so thick, he could have been stuck in this for years after his wife died. I mean, he was a much older guy. Or maybe he didn't want people to know that he was dating a much younger woman and judging him. But Danville's a small town and people saw Teresa and Julian out and about, and eventually he's got to come out with the news. Julian's wife passed away in late January, and by June, he was moving Teresa into the house. But first, he has to introduce her to his kids. And the way Julian does this, because he's real nervous about it, is he just goes in to rip the Band-Aid off. Now, Kathy, his daughter, she was very, very protective of her dad. And in one of the documentaries that I watched about this case, they actually had Kathy on interviewing. And I thought this was a really, really interesting detail. Kathy says that the day that her dad introduced Teresa to them, she had just had a surgery and she couldn't speak. She literally could not get words out of her throat at the time. It was impossible for her to speak. And when Julian brought Teresa home, he said, "Hey, this is Teresa. This is my girlfriend, and she's going to move in today." And Kathy could not talk. She couldn't respond to this. And Teresa said, "Well, you can just call me Mom." And she's completely infuriated by this, the way that the information is introduced, the fact that Teresa is only a few years older than her, and also she walks into the house like she owns everything. It was a really weird energy, and the kids had no say because Dad was happy and he was going to pursue this. She moves in June, and by September, not only are they married, but Teresa has quit her job and kicked her feet up because she said, "My new man, Julian, he's going to take care of me and I don't have to work." Not working and being kind of a kept woman in a small town or in the South, it can be seen as a little bit of a status symbol. But for somebody like Teresa, who has had a pretty chaotic upbringing, she's not going to be able to slide into this mundane lifestyle where she's free to do whatever she wants day to day with no stakes very easily. She's still going to crave excitement. Now, they had been in the marriage for a couple months when one day Jason ends up calling Kathy and he tells her, "You're not going to believe this. Teresa just hit on me. She just offered herself up sexually to me." Reminder, this is Julian's son that lives in the house. And Julian is off at work taking care of everyone. And Teresa's in the house trying to hook up with his son. Jason didn't really want to tell his dad because I don't think he wanted to be involved. He probably didn't want to upset his dad. And either way, he had turned down Teresa's advances, but it was a very uncomfortable situation. But that discomfort didn't last for long because very abruptly, Jason died in a car accident. It was another emotional blow for Julian. He had just lost his wife a year prior, and now he's losing his oldest son. When your immediate family passes away like this, it's traumatic. It's incredibly traumatic. And what is our response to unprocessed trauma? I need to make sure that doesn't ever happen again. I need to make sure it doesn't happen again. So Julian starts to get very protective of everyone he loves. He's protective of Teresa. He's protective of Kathy. He's protective of CJ. He needs to keep everybody close because he is a man. He needs to protect them. He needs to defend them. And this creates a lot of anxiety and stress in his life. Now, Teresa, his wife, is not very good at comforting this because she doesn't even know how to take care of her own problems. So Julian is completely in his pain alone. And when we have a partner that doesn't know how to deal with their own shit and we're going through some stuff, they are not there for us. They don't know how to be, and then they tend to just disconnect and go off and do other stuff. And that's exactly what Teresa did. Her demeanor was basically like, "This is getting too serious. I don't want to play here anymore. I'm going to go over here. Give me money." That's exactly what she did to this man when he was at his absolute fucking lowest. Julian is still dealing with the death of his wife. He's dealing with the death of his oldest son. But there's one thing that comes out of it. It's a life insurance policy. His son actually had a life insurance policy for $200,000. And he doesn't even find this out till later. You know, it's not like he was calling for it or anything. You know, they approached him and they told him, "Your son has a life insurance policy and you are the sole beneficiary." $200,000. This is kind of a windfall of money for the early 2000s in a southern town that's pretty poor. And Julian decides that he wants to start fresh. Very understandable. He wants to get out of the house that has all of these haunting memories of people that he's loved his whole life. And he wants to start over new. And he also wants to make Teresa happy. So he goes out and buys this 3-bedroom house on a 5-acre plot of land. He moves Teresa out there with CJ, Kathy, and then also Teresa's youngest daughter. Her name was Christy Bean. Christy Bean is an interesting character because Kathy would later go on to say that Teresa and Christy were not like mother and daughter. They were like sisters. They were like best friends. This is something that I just personally don't fuck with because as a mother, you are not your daughter's best friend, okay? You can be close with your daughter, but you need to be a mother first. And that's not how she was. Teresa didn't have any girlfriends, so she latched onto her daughter, making her her best friend. That creates a really weird dynamic for a young girl to not have a mother figure and not really have her dad in her life either. So honestly, Christy's pretty fucking weird. So before all of this, they were already living pretty well because Julian is a hardworking man that's dedicated to taking care of the people that he loves. That's why he let Christy move in. That's why he took his kids with him to the new place. And sure, it was on 5 acres of land, but it was a mobile home and it only had like 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. But Julian, he was here to provide for everyone and keep the people that he loved the most taken care of. That's all that mattered. But this windfall of money adds a new piece of information to Teresa's world. Like I said, she wasn't the smartest person ever, and we'll get to that later with the trial. But her world was created by information that was fed or modeled to her. And the only way to make money that was modeled to her was to work. Work, get paid. Work, get money. I don't know, sell drugs, get money, still work, right? But now she's learned that insurance money pays a whole lot. If somebody dies, you can get a whole lot of money. That is the new piece of information that has just been implanted in Teresa's brain. Now, fast forward to 2002, and we are not fast forwarding much because in 2 years, Julian has lost his wife, met Teresa, moved her into the house, married her, lost his oldest son, gotten $200,000, and moved his family to a bigger home. A lot has happened in 2 years, but for Teresa, this is still pretty slow paced. So in 2002, while she's at Walmart, standing in the checkout line, she meets these 2 guys, Matthew and his friend Rodney. This is the part that gets me because Matthew and Teresa are really the ones that hit it off. And when you look at Matthew, he looks like a guy that, you know, you might have gone to college with, or he worked in the IT department or something. He was actually originally from New York and had moved down to Danville. He seems almost like somebody that doesn't fit into the story. And so it really breaks my brain looking at Matthew and looking at Teresa and saying, how did you guys, like, what is going on? I've been trying to understand what the connection was. And one thing that I found was there wasn't a lot of information on Matthew because nobody really talked to him. There's barely any pictures. Nobody really spoke up for him. And he's also now since passed. But one thing that I did find was Matthew had these weird fantasies about being a drug lord. He literally wanted to be like a Pablo Escobar almost. And now this makes a little bit more sense to me because Teresa looked like she got some drugs. But he didn't just start talking to Teresa to like get drugs from her or something. Because look, I'm sorry, I'm going to say it again. Teresa definitely looked like she know where some drugs are at. But they start hooking up. 21-year-old Matthew and now 41-year-old Teresa are not just here to do drugs together. They're here to hook up. And it's raunchy because back at Teresa's house, there's several people that live there. So what do? They start hooking up in the car, in parking lots. The parking lot situation happened multiple times. So much so that Teresa invited her best friend to come out and hook up with Rodney, the friend of Matthew. Now, you remember what I said earlier. Who is Teresa's best friend? Her daughter. That's right. She brought out her 16-year-old daughter to hook up with an adult man that she was pimping her daughter out, basically. She was like using her as, oh yeah, I have a friend. You know when you like go to hang out with a guy and they're like, oh, do you have any friends that you can bring? Bitch, Teresa brought her daughter. I can't believe it. I can't. So Teresa's hooking up with Matthew and Christy's hooking up with Rodney in the car. And then they all finish and they say, woo, that was fun. Let's go get drinks. I'm not fucking kidding. So this is a high that Teresa was looking for while Julian, her husband, was just at the textile mill being an electrician and a nice guy. Oh, and Teresa's loving the attention because outside of pimping out her daughter to these guys that she doesn't even know, she would go over to Matt's house and, you know, they would do drugs and they had a threesome. Her, Rodney, and Matt. They were all hooking up to Teresa, 41-year-old Teresa. Now, as if this wasn't bad enough, Matthew has a few questions. Teresa, why don't you work? Why are you able to come over here all the time? What do you do? Why do you have such a nice place? And she tells him about the insurance money. And that's when they decide to come up with another plan. Shockingly, but not shockingly, Matthew Schallenberger is not the only person that Teresa is having an affair with. She's also sleeping with a guy from church. This woman had no boundaries. She loved sex, she loved attention, and she loved seducing men and feeling like she was worthy of this attention. While all of this is going on, Julian does start to suspect she's cheating, mostly because the murmurs in town or her claiming she's going to church and then coming back at super late hours. But something else is going on at this time. America was about to go to war.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
Julian's other son, CJ, had been in the reserves for a while, but he was about to go into active duty. During this time, it was very common for the military to tell you, hey, make sure you have somebody back home that can distribute your assets if anything were to happen to you. They also, loosely would mention life insurance policies, but given what happened to CJ's brother and how much that money helped the family, he actually took it upon himself before going out to duty to get a life insurance policy. He wanted to look out for his parents if anything were to happen to him. And by parents, I mean Teresa and Julian. Teresa was telling them from day one, call me mom. And Kathy wasn't really into it, but CJ, he appreciated Teresa's presence to a point. He did kind of consider her his mom. So much so that he put Julian as the beneficiary, and then he put Teresa as the secondary beneficiary. And he very proudly told his parents that he had done this. He wanted to let them know that if anything happened to me, you'll be okay. That's when Teresa finds out that there is a life insurance policy out there for $250,000 that has her name on it. But right above her name is her husband's name. Now that Teresa knows the benefits of a life insurance policy, she wants in on the money. No more asking Julian if she can have money for this. No more living in a house with all of these people and not being able to do everything that she wants. That money could be a means to freedom, but it doesn't go directly to her. It goes to Julian first. So she sets out to have a little conversation with Matthew and his friend Rodney and explain to them how she could make some money and how they could make some money too. In October of 2002, Teresa met with Rodney and Matthew and gave them $1,200 to go buy shotguns from Walmart. Just like that, she gave them the money and told them, go in there and get those guns and go get the bullets. They all knew what they were doing. They had planned to kill CJ and also kill Julian. That way the money went straight to Teresa. So they have the guns and they make their plan. Teresa was supposed to stay at home while Matthew and Rodney waited on the side of the road for Julian to come home. While he was driving back in his truck, they were going to stop him, pretend to rob him, but then kill him on the side of the road, making it just look like a robbery that went wrong, while Teresa was at home and could claim innocence. And then when Charles, CJ, came home for the funeral, they were just going to kill him too. They hadn't figured out how they were going to do that yet, but that was the plan. Something changes though when, shockingly, CJ had come home early to surprise his dad. He was just going to be home for a week or so before being deployed again, but he knew that his dad needed him. Remember, it had only been 2 years since his real mom had died, and he was still going through it. Look, and everybody knew Teresa was cheating at this point. Julian had even started to consider getting a divorce. So when his son comes home, it is a happy reunion. But for Teresa, it's more of an opportunity. And she hits up Matt and Rodney and says, CJ's in town right now. We got to do this now. The next few details that I'm going to tell you are pretty intense. As a reminder, sure, Sinister is a true crime show, but really what I'm trying to do here are tell stories of people and all of their interactions together. You'll probably notice I generally don't tend to give too many descriptions of what happened on the night of the crime, but some of these details of what they went through that night are really, really important. On October 30th, 2002, Teresa left the door of their house unlocked. She did that so that the two guys could enter in effortlessly. And they did. Teresa went to bed with Julian, and he went to sleep that night thinking it was a regular day. But Teresa laid awake, knowing exactly what's going to happen and waiting for her lover and his friend to come in. On this particular night, Christy Bean, Teresa's daughter, and Kathy, Julian's daughter, were not home. This was all very strategic. When they crept into the house, they walked into Teresa and Julian's room, and Matthew told Teresa to leave the room. And right afterwards, she starts to hear gunshots, multiple gunshots. Matthew began to shoot Julian with a shotgun, and his friend Rodney began to shoot CJ as well with a shotgun. CJ is hit in the chest and dies almost instantly. But Julian is shot multiple times with a shotgun, and he's still alive. And while he's alive, Teresa, the cold-hearted bitch she is, because remember I told you in the beginning of this story, I try to find the human in somebody for a minute before they go wrong. This bitch went wrong a while ago. But if you felt bad for her for any reason before, fuck that, okay? Teresa went into Julian's wallet while he was bleeding out, and he was trying to talk to her, wondering what's happening. And she reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet and pulled out $300 and split it up with Rodney and Matt right then and there. While her husband is bleeding out, she reached into his pocket and took out his wallet. And she knew he was still alive when she did that because he was still mumbling. He was still breathing. Julian was alive. And then, in an odd turn of events, Matthew and Rodney, it's done. They've done it. And he hugs Teresa before he leaves. And he says to her, I'm sorry you had to go through this. As if she wasn't the one masterminding the whole thing from the beginning. Over an hour later, Teresa calls 911. She calls frantically and she says, my husband's dead. I heard gunshots. I don't know who did it. I was in the bathroom. This is when we meet Deputy Corey Webb. He and his team arrive to the scene of the crime with Teresa. Oh, my husband. And they walk into the bedroom and they see something so shocking. Julian is still alive. And when Julian hears these footsteps, he thinks it's Teresa and he starts to say, baby, 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 baby. Even after being shot multiple times with the shotgun, he is still calling Teresa baby. That's what kind of man he was. And there must be a point where he realizes that these footsteps are not Teresa and it's actually the police. And he says to the police with his dying breath, my wife know who done this to me. Those are his exact words. He said, my wife know who done this to me. Julian had been struck in the upper left arm, the shoulder, the abdomen, the pelvis, his penis, the thighs, legs, arms, and chest. The bullets destroyed and removed the tissue of large parts of his body, and he had fractured several ribs. There was also a bullet lodged in his lungs. But none of these injuries were fatal, and he lay there for hours, bleeding out, before the cops arrived. But he was still able to tell the officers that Teresa was involved. And shortly after they arrived and he said that, he died. As absolutely disturbing it is that Julian survived all of those gunshot wounds, it's also crazy to me that they kept him alive long enough for him to tell the officers that Teresa was involved. And they take this dying man's word very seriously. As much as Teresa wants to act like she didn't know what was going on, Corey Webb was not going to let her get away with it. They asked Teresa for her account of the night, and she basically says that these robbers broke in, told her to go to the bathroom, and she didn't know what happened from there. She claims that the night prior, she and Julian had done their normal routine. They prayed before bed, she packed his lunch, and they went to sleep. The investigators found the brown bagged lunch. This is important. The brown bagged lunch in the refrigerator with a note from Teresa that said, "I love you. Have a good day." Then there was a little smiley face, and it said, "I miss you when you're gone." Teresa did this to try to signal to investigators that she was a good wife. Now, I've said that Danville is a very small town and Teresa is not the brightest woman, but that's just Teresa because these deputies are smart, okay? What I love about it, I love good logic and I love good police work. And as soon as they walked in, they were putting pieces together, okay? It didn't take them 12 hours or 24 hours to figure it out. They walked in and they said, They noticed that there was no break-in to the door. The lock wasn't picked. Nothing was busted off of it. And then my favorite detail that they picked up on was CJ was killed in his bedroom and Julian was killed in his bedroom. Both of them had been shot multiple times, but in the room where CJ was killed, there were no bullet shells. But in the room where Julian was killed, there were 5 or 6 bullet shells. They could also tell by the scene of the crime that this wasn't rushed. Nothing was frantically strewn about. It seemed like the killers had plenty of time to do whatever they want and leave. Now, why would there be bullet casings in one room, but not in the other? The detectives determined this is because there were 2 shooters, and one liked to clean up after themselves, and the other didn't think to do it. They take Teresa's statement, but they are on a mission to find out who these 2 were. But not even a week passes by until Teresa starts calling around, trying to figure out where the money is. And you think I'm talking about the life insurance policy? Oh yeah, she wanted that too. But she also wanted Julian's check from the textile mill. Immediately. She called the next day. The person that told him this was Mike Campbell. He was Julian's supervisor. Mike called almost immediately and said, Teresa just called me on the day of the murder and asked for Julian's check. He told her that he couldn't give her the check until 4 o'clock that evening, but he thought it was weird. The investigators decide to ask him a few more questions, and they tell him about the lunch that Teresa had packed for them that day. And Mike said, "That's weird, because I've never, ever seen Julian come in with a brown paper bag. He always brought his lunch in a white and blue cooler. Every single day." Teresa had never packed this man's lunch a day in her life. The next day, on October 31st, 2002, Teresa calls again, asking for his paycheck. Next, Teresa starts calling for the life insurance money. They explain to her the process that basically it's not that easy and it's not that quick, but this goes on record. Now, when the insurance company flags this and she can't really get the money directly from them, she ends up calling one of the lieutenants in the military. She calls CJ's boss and she says, "Hey, I'm the secondary beneficiary to this life insurance policy and I want my money." And the lieutenant is like, "Why are you calling me?" His name's Lieutenant Booker. Booker is like, first of all, why are you calling me? Second of all, why are you talking about this less than a week after your husband and stepson have been murdered? You gotta be kidding me. Like, I'm telling you, dude, Teresa's dumb. She's dumb. But Booker is still on the phone with her. And so he says, I don't know what you want me to do about the life insurance. He's like, I mean, I do have his check and his personal items. And he said, I can give it to Kathy, his sister. And Teresa says, you get me that life insurance money, you get me that check, and then you can give the other stuff to Kathy. And he's like, are you kidding? She basically said, give me the money. Give me the money, and anything else he has, his clothes, his sentimental items, yeah, give him to his sister. And she also was very angry on the phone and reminded him before she got off, I just want to remind you, I am the sole beneficiary of it. So anything that he has, you need to ask me first. Hangs up the phone. Now, we've talked about Kathy, Julian's daughter, a little bit throughout this story. And you've heard that Kathy lost her mother in January 2000. Kathy took amazing care of her dad during this devastating period. Kathy gets introduced to this nightmare woman, but holds it in for, the sake of her dad's happiness. And now Kathy has lost her 2 brothers, her mother, and her father, all in the course of 2 years. Kathy has had it. She's done. When this week blows by and she hears that stupid ass Teresa is calling around saying, where's the money? Where's the money? She has had enough. Kathy's always known that something's up with Teresa, but after the murders happened, this is the talk of the town because people heard that before calling the police, Teresa had actually called her really good friend and then also her ex-mother-in-law before she called the police to say that Julian had been shot. She then doesn't mourn her husband, Kathy's father, at all. There's no sorrow. There's no remorse. She even told Kathy, don't come to the funeral. She planned the funeral almost immediately because she was trying to go to the insurance company and say, look, everyone's passed. Give me the money. Give me the money. That's all that's going through Teresa's dumb little head. Give me the money. Kathy is devastated and will not rest until they continue to investigate Teresa. And what happens when people that don't know each other very well commit a murder and then get caught by the police? I'll give you a second. That's right. They turn on each other. Within only a couple of hours of the interrogation, Teresa crumbles. She crumbles. The evidence was stacked against her. And they try to give her an out. And they say, is there anyone that you know of that might have wanted your husband dead? Like, we know you know something. You have to know something. And Teresa's like, okay. I do know something. I can't believe I'm saying this. This is actually what she told the investigators. She says, okay, I do actually know something. And I know somebody that might have wanted to kill Julian. There's this guy, Matt or something, and he was in love with me, and he didn't like the way that Julian was treating me. So he might have killed him or something. I'm not kidding. That's what she said. And they asked her, do you know his name? She didn't even know his last name. I said, well, do you know where he lives? And she's like, yeah, I know where he lives. And before they can even pull out of the police department and go to Matthew's house, she also, of course, implicates Rodney and then her daughter, Christy. Teresa spilled all the beans in less than a couple of hours. That night, Teresa, Matthew, and Rodney are all charged with first-degree murder. And at this time, Virginia has capital punishment. That means the death penalty is on the table. Now, to get Teresa off the hook for capital punishment, they try to do some weird legal stuff. Basically, they tell her to waive the jury, plead guilty, and then invoke her right to be sentenced by a trial judge, because generally the trial judge doesn't impose the death penalty. Now, here's where things get more interesting. I personally think that IQ tests are kind of silly, but at this time, they use the numbers in the IQ test to prove competency. So I'm going to read those to you because this is an interesting turn in the case. Believe it or not, people later advocated for Teresa not to get the death penalty despite the gruesomeness of her crimes. And this is why. Teresa had a full-scale IQ of 72, a verbal IQ of 70, and a performance IQ of 79. This placed her in the borderline range of intellectual functioning, but not at or below the level of mentally impaired. If Teresa had scored 70 or less on the IQ test, then they would not legally be able to execute her because she would be considered mentally impaired by the Virginia legal standards. But with an IQ of 72, they said that she was fit for the death penalty. And if she did get the death penalty, she would be the first woman to be executed in Virginia since 1912. On June 3rd, just 8 months after the murders, she would stand trial and read an apology to everyone. This is what her apology said. I was doing drugs, stealing, lying, and having several affairs during my marriages. I went to church every Sunday and Friday and revivals, but guess what? I didn't open my Bible at home, only when I was at church. And I'm sorry. That was the apology. I didn't read my Bible more. I'm sorry. This is also interesting to me because Teresa had every good Christian moral right in front of her, day in and day out, and she chose to turn a blind eye to it and chase after the adrenaline. As sentences come down, Matthew was sentenced to 6 life terms in prison. He planned to take this money from the murders that Teresa was going to give him and move back to New York to be the kingpin that he always dreamed. Matt was a weird guy. He was very, very troubled. Rodney also pled guilty and was sentenced to life in prison. And then Christy Bean was originally given 50 years in prison for knowing about the murders and basically doing nothing to stop them. She was also heavily involved in the planning. You remember when I told you that she wasn't there that night? She knew. But on June 3rd, 2003, Teresa was sentenced to death. She would be the first woman executed in Virginia in almost 100 years. Like I said, this sparked a lot of uproar because a lot of people don't agree with the death penalty. Like, why should the state have the power to take a life when, we're punishing somebody for taking a life in the first place? And other people supported her because they felt like she was a woman with low IQ and it just wasn't fair. Regardless of what side you're on September 23rd, 2010, Teresa headed to her execution. This was a really big deal. There were people from the prison, people from the judicial system, news reporters, and somebody else. Somebody that wanted to be present for Teresa's execution. It was Kathy Lewis, Julian's daughter. Kathy needed to be there. She said that she wanted to finally see justice for her brother and justice for her father. She said, I needed to see it through to the end. On September 23rd, Teresa arrived wearing a light blue shirt, dark blue pants, and flip-flops. She came through the door at 8:55. The reporters said that she looked around seeming dazed and anxious. She had known death was coming for a long time, but this was it. This was the moment. She looked around at all of the people that were nearby to witness her death, and she was strapped down on the gurney. Now, outside of the prison, several people were outside protesting right up until the moment of Teresa's death. At 8:58, the officials drew back a blue curtain. At 9:09, the curtain opened back up, and Teresa's arms were extended out with tubes going into her body, held in by white tape. And in one of my least favorite parts of this case, Teresa says something that I feel like is very sick. They asked her if she had any last words. And her last words were, I just want Kathy to know that I love you and I'm very sorry. If I were Kathy, the last thing that I would want to hear would be my immediate family's killer telling me that they loved me. But those were her last words. And in Virginia, there's 3 chemicals that are distributed during lethal injection. The first is thiopentyl sodium, which renders the person unconscious. That began to flow. The next is a chemical that stops breathing. And then the final one, potassium chloride, stops the heart. At 9:13 p.m., Teresa Lewis was pronounced dead, and they drew the curtain back.